Megillah Esther is perhaps, you'll see in a second, there may be one other exception, the only book in Tanakh that does not mention the name of God. It's very, very quite amazing that you have a book in the Kisvei HaKodesh in which the Shem Hashem is not mentioned explicitly. Now I say there may be one other exception, depending on how you punctuate a word, that is Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, which on one hand is the way Chazal understand it, is a passionate metaphor for the divine love that God has for the Jewish people and the love that the Jewish people have for God. And yet the name of Hashem, a Yud Kei Vav Kei, or some name of God that you wouldn't be able to pronounce normally, is actually not in Shir HaShirim, but it depends, because at the very end of Shir HaShirim, it talks about love is like a fire that even the most torrential waters cannot extinguish. And it says it is shalhavesya. Shalhavesya. So there is a machlokas both in the Gemara and among Mefarshim. If shalhavesya is two words or one word, if it's two words, you actually read it shalhevet ka, the burning torch of God, in which case you do have God's name. Others say shalhavesya is simply one word and is simply a poetic elongation of the word shalhevet. So in Shir HaShirim, we have a bit of a machlokas, is Hashem's name mentioned. But in the book of Esther, it's not. Now, interestingly enough, you know the Septuagint. Septuagint was the translation of the Torah into Greek that was commissioned around 300 BCE. And if you recall, Chazal considered that to be a sad time because you're making the Torah accessible to the Gentiles. On the other hand, Philo of Alexandria, who was the leading Jewish leader of that community, a great philosopher as well, he considered that to be a holiday, and he actually records a tradition that the Jews of Alexandria celebrated as a Yom Tov, so to speak, the day that the Septuagint was completed. It's interesting that in Eretz Yisrael, our Chazal regarded it as a tragedy. In Alexandria, it was considered to be a great simcha. But be it as it may, although the original Septuagint only covered the Torah, Chamisha Chumshei Torah, but later there were augmentations. Right now, the Septuagint covers the entire Old Testament. But what's interesting is that there are some additions, meaning to say that the Septuagint has some hosafot, a few hosafot that do not appear, and some of them are in the Apocrypha. And interestingly enough, there are some additions to the book of Esther that do not appear in the canonical text. And fascinatingly enough, although one might have suspected the Septuagint and the Apocrypha to have chalokim that are less religious in orientation, their additions to the book of Esther involve Esther's prayers to Hashem, and they put in Hashem's name many, many times. You would think that that should give it authenticity, and yet our Chachamim took the opposite point, that the book of Esther specifically does not mention the name of God, and those later editions were trying to make it look more religious, as it were, but in fact it was not authentic. Now, why it doesn't mention the name of Hashem is a very, very interesting mystery. Part of it is connected to the notion that the word Esther itself is connected to the word for concealment. And this is a miracle that did not happen by supernatural intervention, but it's a well-established theme that every step in the Purim story, God is operating through nature and through the appearance of coincidence, etc. And therefore God is operating in a concealed, non-miraculous way, and that is why his name is not mentioned, as if to say he is hiding his face, but we have to look and see it, as opposed to Mitzrayim, when he is showing us clearly that he's doing all of these miracles. But whatever the reason, there is in the Zohar a very important teaching, that even though Hashem's name is not explicitly mentioned in the Megillah, whenever it says the word HaMelech, the king, even though on a pshat level, the king, of course, refers to Achashverosh, but there's a deeper level in which it is a reference to Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means when you read Megillah Esther, there are going to be two meanings. There is lower meaning and there is higher meaning. Now, these are not contradictory. So, for example, when it says that the night of the great turnaround, when Achashverosh couldn't sleep and Achashverosh wanted to have somebody read the diaries or the chronicles of the kingdom, and remember, that's when he discovers Mordechai, who saved his life, was never rewarded. So the pasuk says, "Balayla hahu." In fact, the Baal Koreh even raises his voice at that pasuk, because that is actually the changeover from all of the bad decrees to the beginning of the redemption. Balayla hahu, that night, nadada shenas hamelech, the king's sleep was disturbed. Double meaning. On one hand, Achashverosh couldn't sleep. On the other hand, it's a reference, as the Medrash says, to the pasuk in Tehillim, Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan, Shomer Yisrael, the guardian of Israel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, does not sleep or slumber, meaning what looked like God being asleep at the wheel, God's up now. Right? So that double meaning permeates every aspect of Megillah Esther.